Thanks for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be actually in New Zealand. It's my first time to be, so I'm clearly a novice to New Zealand. That said, I have to say, if you come in as a Swiss to New Zealand, it feels very homey. It feels kind of, you can associate with many of the things, with many of the good things that are here. So with that brief, what I'd like to do is, first of all, as well, thank the BusinessNZ Zealand Energy Council for hosting that. It has been a very intense learning over the past 2 days, intense as Rob has described. Thank you for that. What I'd like to do is actually give a bit of the global perspective that the World Energy Council has. Very briefly on WEC, we have been around for 90 years, 90, so we are older than the UN. I mentioned that when I met Mr. Secretary General. He was jealous, obviously. We are older than the UN. We are in almost 100 countries, that's slightly less than the UN. But we have 3,000 organizations, public and private sector and academia, in those almost 100 countries as our members. And that makes us simply the best, deepest, strongest network in energy. We are in producing, consuming countries, so there's no producer versus consumer. We are in developing versus industrial. There's no gap between the Chinas, that we have the Chinas, the Ethiopias, the USAs as our member. Equally, they have the same voice in our executive assembly, one voice. We have all technologies represented, as much nuclear, solar, the coal, the oil, the gas, the electricity, everything is there. A bit of transport, a bit of finance, so we can cover all aspects of energy, and I think that makes us unique. There is simply no other organization who knows how to talk to business, to government, and make sense out of the signals that we get from those 3,000 organizations. And that is our mandate, making sense out of this unique opportunity, the 3,000 organizations that are there. And I think the reason why you're probably here is because uncertainty keeps all of you awake at night. This is a statement that probably you can associate with, but it's something that is very true out there. The first thing that we have said at opening our Congress last year, 7,500 people, 52 ministers we had there. The first thing we said is, this is a time of unprecedented uncertainty in energy. And many of you have much longer history in energy than I do, but here's the way I try to rationalize that. Think 20 years back and ask yourself, what were the investment signals in energy 20 years back? There was one, oil price. Now ask yourself, what are the investment signals today in energy? There's a multiplicity. Yes, it's still oil price. It's multiple gas prices, depending on the region where you are. It's the increasing nuclear costs after Fukushima. Safety costs have driven that. It's the collapsing solar price. It's the uncertainty between CO2 price, the future of CO2 price. That's from one signal to a multiplicity of signals, and that defines complexity. First statement. Second statement, ask yourself 20 years back, what would have been defined as speed in energy? What was short-term versus mid-term? What does it mean in energy? And 20 years back, you would have said, well, let's try and rationalize the word mid-term or short-term. Short-term is probably the time it takes to turn around a significant capital stock that has its imprint or that has effect on energy demand. And the most shortest one was actually transportation fleet, 20 years to turn it around, and that was seen as short-term almost. That was kind of as quick as you could make change. Now look what happened in the last decade or so. We have seen from 3.2 to 32% factor 10 in 8 years increase of shale gas in the US. That's game-changing. We have seen solar prices to collapse from $4.7 to $0.6 per watt peak in 5 years. We have seen Fukushima change the nuclear outlook in one moment. And I think taking those together, there is no more slow energy. This is, you like slow food, I like slow food. New Zealanders obviously like slow food, and it's very appreciative. And as energy leaders, you like slow energy, forget it. There is no more slow energy. And taking the two together, the kind of complexity of signals plus the no more slow energy, That's uncertainty. I think that's what keeps energy leaders awake at night. What I'd like to do is lead you a bit through what are the moving issues, what are the shifts in issues. Second, I'm going to briefly talk about energy efficiency. Third, I'm going to briefly outline scenarios and highlight Rob, who has chaired our scenarios work for 3 years, the global scenarios work for 3 years, and then bring it back to what were some of the takeaways from our last Congress, where we again had this unique opportunity to have the world leaders in energy in one room, a big room. It was 7,500, takes a big room. First, let me start with the Issues Monitor. Brief introduction. What is the Issues Monitor? Ask yourself for one moment, what is the global energy agenda? How do you measure it? How do you rationalize it? What is an agenda? An agenda is something where leaders want to sit together and agree on a way forward. In order to do that, you need actually to understand, if you want to bring leaders together and have that dialogue, you need to understand which are the issues that keep them awake at night. And that defines really the agenda. And we are measuring that. We are measuring that in the almost 100 countries where we are active. There's behind this, what you see here, there is almost 900 feedbacks from people that are ministers or minister -1, advisors or deputies, CEOs C-1, almost 900 feedback from 84 countries are behind this survey. And we do that annually. We keep it updated, and we are able therefore to tell you what globally, what regionally, what in New Zealand, and thanks to the BusinessNZ Energy Council for surveying 50 feedbacks here in New Zealand. What are the issues that keep energy leaders awake at night? Let me show you how we read this. If it looks complicated, that's now. In 5 minutes you will love it. It's for free on our website. You can use it yourself. If you want to do it in your own context, we can Business New Zealand can facilitate getting your own issue map out there. How to read it: uncertainty, high uncertainty, low uncertainty, impact on the energy sector, high impact, low impact, which makes this up here the space of high impact, high uncertainty, the space of keep me awake at night, what keeps energy leaders awake at night up there. What is the top issues that globally, this is the global map, what keeps global leaders most awake at night? Again, almost 900 feedback from 84 countries behind that. Energy price volatility is the #1 issue. And I've mentioned already the signals from one to multi-business, how quickly they have changed. It's that kind of the quick change of relative pricing, which defines whether you have a stranded investment or a successful venture, is the #1 issue that keeps energy leaders awake at night. 2, global recession. Global recession has actually pushed off a climate framework. Climate framework was the uncertainty behind the question of what is the CO2 price going to look like, how big and when. That uncertainty was the #1 issue for the past 5 years. Recession has pushed this off for the first time over the past 5 years. Now, so climate framework, global recession, energy price, and access to capital markets. The short summary again on the capital markets, recently we had a finance roundtable, and a prominent finance person said in the Chatham House, and utilities are no longer the darling of the investors. And I think that summarizes very political risk, market risk, technological risk. Those risks have gone up and made money shy away from energy as we haven't seen that for a long time. Access, so utilities spend more time today, and it's true for oil and gas to some extent as well, but more importantly for utilities, political risk, market and technological, they're hugely exposed. Money is shying away from going where the risk is high. Now, on the action items, energy efficiency, renewables, regional interconnection, China, India, understanding China, how China and India affects your own markets. Those are the key priorities globally of energy leaders, what they spend most of their time with. Now, it's one thing to look at this issue survey in a static, and I could go into greater depth, but it's another interesting thing to ask, how have things changed? Because it's that change that defines the uncertainty. Now, how have things, the most dramatic change over the past 5 years, look at this one. Carbon capture and sequestration is flying off the map. The question of whether we can put away carbon and whether it's going to happen, this is simply, and we can measure that again, 900 feedback from senior decision makers in 84 countries say we do not believe CCS is going to make a difference in time. Let me put it very clearly, we have to be shocked about this. We have to, if CCS is one of the solutions, this tells we do not believe, or energy leaders do not believe actually this is going to make a difference in time. Second, nuclear, pre-Fukushima, Fukushima, post-Fukushima, and that's where we are. You can absolutely see the Fukushima peak in this. You can see that nuclear has not landed in the same place where it was pre-Fukushima, and we could have a long discussion where we are with nuclear today. The short scenario story would be without strong government support, forget nuclear. The market will not deliver nuclear. That's the very short message that will come from the scenarios. Third issue, the steepest upwards trend is unconventionals. We have seen, and it's not only gas, everybody has spoken, has been talking about shale gas, it's also unconventional oil. The factor 4 of 4.8 trillion barrels of unconventional oils compared to the 1.3 trillion barrel of reserves of conventional oil. That's the explosion that has pushed peakists far into the future. The peakists have a future only far in the future, basically, is the short story, and that's because of the factor 4 in unconventionals. Energy efficiency, renewables, those, if you look at those, they have hardly moved. Very robust. The top number 1 action items are energy efficiency, renewables, and they are very robust. So if you're on that side of the equation, we can state, yes, and in New Zealand is a great example, you have the business case for geothermal and for wind is absolutely there. It's an obvious one why this one is not moving here. Let me quickly go into the New Zealand map. That is actually, if you look at it, energy price volatility, China, India, global recession, climate framework, energy efficiency, renewable. Sounds kind of familiar, huh? We have seen that on the global map. The bubbles are slightly smaller, you see that. So the shortest story one can say about New Zealand, it's kind of the same as global, really the same as global, but with slightly less tension in it because it's further. The size of the bubble is saying how urgent it is. Small bubble, less urgent, big bubble, very urgent. It hits me now. It doesn't hit you now, so you can sleep better than the average of energy leaders across the world. That's probably the short message that you can take out of the New Zealand map. Similar concerns as global, but you sleep better here. And the reason for that is simply because you have a reasonably well-oiled machine. Actually, your system is reasonably, that doesn't mean there is not things on the margin that one can probably further develop, but overall the system is a well-oiled machine here. Now, some of the things, the insular character of New Zealand you can see in the regional interconnection. Remember that on the global scale, the regional interconnection issue was actually here. So regional interconnection in New Zealand is not that prominent, and you can obviously rationalize why that is the case. Clearly, that's one of the differences one can find. And probably here's the other issue that I would actually highlight. Energy affordability is probably the one issue that is, in comparison to global, is relatively high on the agenda. It's not a unique case. Many countries struggle with that, but clearly if one issue comes out strongly here as an issue to kind of be concerned about, it's affordability. Let me quickly make the case. Energy affordability, we have seen in the UK, has brought a former Secretary of Energy and current party leader to say, let's freeze tariffs. Great contribution to energy insecurity. You know, make sure that this doesn't happen here. I think it's probably that's the warning signal. If energy affordability is an issue, take it seriously. It's happened elsewhere that actually this can truly harm energy security if you do not take it seriously. Very briefly, I mentioned that was the first point. Issues monitor, it's free on the web. You can download it. You have publications, physical ones. So for everybody who needs more information, there's so much more information in there. You can have your own issue map if needed. Again, that can be facilitated. My second point is about energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, and I'm saying this is, we have seen it's a global no-braining action item. So let's quickly understand how good we are in making progress. Are we really making progress? Are we speeding up on energy efficiency progress? And here's the answer. This says in terms of energy intensity. Energy intensity improvements per country. Look at the trend here. This is China. blue is the decade before 2000, the first 8 year before financial crisis, after 2000, then the post-financial crisis. What you can see is China, look at the world, this is the world, look at some other countries. Overall, there is declining success in harvesting energy intensity benefits. So we are slowing down on the energy efficiency side. Very important, I'm highlighting this because it's very important to understand where we are with UN Sustainable Energy for All. Remember the objective, UN Sustainable Energy for All, by the way, absolutely great initiative we think at WEC, because it has brought back energy into the center of not only the development the discussion. Millennium Development Goal, was there any reference to energy? Zero. Formulated 20 years ago. Zero reference to energy. Let me quickly be communist and tell you what Lenin did. He said, he said communism is Soviet power plus electricity for all. That was 100 years ago. There was some strategic insight that was actually somewhere around, but people have forgotten it or thought it was irrelevant. We are waking up to the same reality that actually energy is pretty basic if you want to have, if you want to have a social society. And socially stable society. I think China has seen that, Lenin has understood it 100 years ago, and we finally understand it as well. I think, again, communist bracket closed. I think the key point about, to bring it back to UNSC for All, 3 objectives, and the UNSC for All has brought back energy into the center of the development. By 3 objectives were formulated: energy efficiency objective, a universal access objective, and the renewable energy objectives. Do we fully think those are the first best? It's kind of second best. It's probably second best. They couldn't address the climate issue. They couldn't, I think the energy efficiency and renewables are a second best behind the climate objectives, which they didn't dare to actually spell out. So I think that was, in terms of that way, we look at this as a pragmatic second best. Clearly the universal access, we have no doubt, we fully blindly support as a key objective in that space. Now, energy efficiency. What is UNSC for All saying for energy efficiency? Currently, on average, look at this number here, on average over the past 20 years, we had 1.6% pre-2000. We have, on the average over the last 2 decades, a 1.3% energy intensity improvement. UNSC says, and by the way, that's the exact number, that is the average here, I understand, in New Zealand. 1.3% global average, New Zealand average. Again, you seem to be a very perfect fit, a small world just with a better system. What the UNSC for All says, we need to double that rate of energy intensity improvement. Now, are we getting there? What this says, we are doing the opposite. We are decreasing the speed. So from 1.3, we are actually going down. Is that because we have harvested the low-hanging fruit? Is that because it's simply getting more complex? Is it because of structural kind of financial and economic and recessionary kind of context? We have excess capacity and therefore more difficult to make the necessary investment in energy efficiency, etc. There may be a mix of those reasons, but the reality is we are slowing down on energy efficiency. Let's keep that in mind. That's my first point. The second point, and I'm coming to our scenarios, but as introduction to our scenarios, let me emphasize the following. Our scenarios, I mean, we have compared it with Greenpeace scenarios and many others, but Greenpeace is probably the most extreme to mention. The mix of what we are saying will be the mix of 2050. Greenpeace almost says the same thing. So we are actually not fundamentally different in what we are saying about the mix. We are quite fundamentally different of what we are saying about energy efficiency. And so Greenpeace and others would accuse WEC to be too conservative. I'm going to show you how conservative we are and let you judge by yourself who is, what conservatism means. Let me give you the number that we used. How much did I say we have on average global for energy efficiency improvement? 1.3%, same as New Zealand. Now we used for our scenarios a range from 2.2 to 2.5. Does this sound conservative to you? It's probably very progressive. Huh? It's very, we can be accused of being blue-eyed, but not conservative in this context. And I'm saying that very consciously to say actually the world may, when showing you the results, the world may be more dark than what we are describing it because we are optimistic on the energy efficiency side. That said, it was the consensus we had. We had taken the bottom-up measures, the bottom-up signals, and it was the kind of the sense that we could achieve that still. Now, let's keep that in mind. Now, with that to our scenarios, what are scenarios briefly? The way we run this, and again, Rob has done this with a group of about 60 experts from over 30 countries, regional workshops in all parts of the world, etc. All kind of about 30 issues papers in the background, and many great support from a lot of people. I think the key first step is to understand what are critical drivers that define the energy future. And we have come up initially with about almost 130, kind of ideas that we then clustered, and the clusters, those were the 15 clusters that came out. I'm not going to do what I've done at the Congress yesterday, at the meeting yesterday. I'm not going to ask you what do you think is more important. Is it government or is it technology innovation? I was hoping to get the right answer. You get at the event yesterday, everybody told me it's actually technology that is more important than government. I think what we said at WEC, in most of the countries around the world, government play a fundamentally important role. They decide, they pick technology, they decide about policies. Think of Germany, think of other countries that pick technology. They subsidize, they decide where to put subsidies, etc. So government have a fundamentally orchestrating role. Now, that's the reason why we put government number one. And based on that statement, we said, well, there's two fundamentally different worlds. There is one world where government takes this orchestrating role, and there is one world where government actually puts a framework and lets the market decide what the best solutions are within a given framework. We call those symphony for the one that is orchestrated, and jazz for the one that can find within a given framework its own solutions. Jazz only works because people accept a certain rhythm, etc., and play to it. So the system must be in place, but then you can improvise, and improvisation may lead to surprising new things, which may be perfectly beautiful. But I think on the orchestration side, it's clearly top-down. Symphony, jazz is bottom-up. What is the difference between those two worlds? So jazz, we said, market trade-based, it's consumer-driven. Jazz, it's about the consumer wants cheap and now. Cheap energy now. In opposition, symphony, government looks at the long-term, ask about climate change, about kind of the long-term energy security, and ask what do I need to put in place to achieve that. Two different worlds, and we have tried to quantify and come up with that. We do not have the time to go in great depth. There's all that is well documented and for free on our website. There's a couple of publications in the the BusinessNZ Energy Council. Now, here are the results. We have, and I'm just showing one which I think first is the mix of the future supply mix. You can see the demand. This is jazz. This is symphony. You can see coal, oil, gas, nuclear, bio, hydro, and other renewables. So that's today, that's 2050, sorry. And what you can see is, first of all, that if you ask fossil fuels, first of all, the demand is obviously increasing. Demand is increasing between 30 and 70% by 2050. What did I say about energy efficiency? We were rather optimistic, so keep that in mind. If you actually want to say, keep in mind, if you go down with the energy efficiency, you easily can say we're getting to a doubling of the demand by 2050 easily. That's probably the message you can read from this. Doubling demand by 2050 would actually an average assumption on energy efficiency mean. Now, what is the fossil fuel? You can see the fossil fuel depends really. Jazz has much more fossil fuel than a symphony approach. We see in the symphony actually fossil fuel roughly stagnating at the same level. In the gas, it increases by about 60% from 10 gigatons of oil equivalent to about 16. But what happens actually within the fossil fuel is quite interesting. We see different ways of the various fossil fuels, how they react. Oil has an outlook uncertainty of about plus minus 15%. Coal has an outlook uncertainty of about plus minus 40%. Ouch, that must worry investors. Gas only goes one way, plus 50 to plus 100%. That's driven by the shale and the broader gas kind of thinking out there. That's the way how we look at the fossil background. And then renewables, where are we? Renewables, we are currently about 15% overall primary mix renewables globally. This goes to about 20 to 30%. Is that a lot? It doesn't sound like, but the reality is 15% includes many of the biomass and other kind of the old renewables. The new renewables, who knows how much solar we have in the global energy system today? Can I have a number? 1%. 5 times less. 0.2% primary energy contribution of solar today. We see solar going up from that 0.2 to about between 6 and 16% in those two worlds. That's an amazing, that's just sheer, that means a factor 100 to 200, and it's driven by continued price collapse in the solar side and regional dynamics in the Middle East and elsewhere. So that's the renewables part of the renewable story. And we believe, by the way, the wind dynamics are less strong globally. You are the world champ, the world Guinness Book leaders in wind harvest factors here. I think the situation that you have for wind here is a dream case for many others who do not come close to even half of the load factors that you get actually with the wind farms. And that makes wind globally less successful than solar. Wind is today 2%, and we believe it's probably going up to about 8% order of magnitude. So we see more potential on the solar side. That's a short story on the mix. What does it do to climate? This is the UNFCCC. Forget those two lines for a moment, and everything except for those two lines comes from UNFCCC. It is the kind of the story, how much CO2 emissions over time can we emit to come close to the 2 degrees Celsius scenarios, which is this zone down here. Neither of our two scenarios is getting there. And now you think of what did I say about the energy efficiency? That's what it does to this. So what we are saying is we are not getting there. With current policies, current technologies, current rate of observations as we observe them, we have not assumed any breakthrough in disruptive innovation. We haven't taken into account any disruptive innovation, but with the current policies, current rates of innovation and policy, current technology, current rate of innovation and technology, we are not going to get there. So we have to work very hard if we want to get there. And I think that's a very strong signal. If we want to get there, we need stronger policies, and that is obviously a call for a CO2 price signal on the one hand, and it's also the question which areas in terms of technology innovation could be most fruitful, and we think of two in particular: electric storage. We have seen, remember the quick decay on the solar, 4.7 to 0.6 in 5 years. It took 7 years to bring storage price down by 50%. That's slow motion. That's very slow motion, and it will not get us the type of dynamic speed that we need from the storage side. Storage is too expensive to drive electric mobility into mass markets. It's too expensive to be used, electric storage, on the mass side for now, for the backup of renewable in the system, etc. So that's simply too expensive today. We need breakthrough. The second technology where we need to break through is the CCS technology. CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, if we had a breakthrough in one of those two, that's game-changing. So we need coordination. We need to have international, better focused, better coordinated efforts in those two potential breakthrough areas. Sub-Saharan Africa, the number of 1.2 billion today, yes, we are decreasing it. By 2050, we see somewhere between 310 and 530 million unelectrified. Look where they are. They are basically all in Sub-Saharan Africa. The last number, that's the 2050 number, that's basically all in Sub-Saharan Africa. And what is the reason for that? First of all, governance, but also 80% of poverty, energy poverty is, and when I say energy poverty here, is access to electricity, is a rural problem. 80% is rural. And when we say rural in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's not a small distance away from a big agglomeration. It can be just far away from every, behind remote areas, behind the mountains and the forests and everywhere where there's no way that you get a line. So the electrification, difficult to get capital there, difficult to get skills there, difficult to get technology there, and for all those, difficult to get the policies in place actually that are not driven out of those places because they have nothing to say. So for all that alignment, the lack of alignment, rural Africa will be last to catch up in the electricity access context. Now, with that said, what is our message? What do we need to do to get dynamics and support positive dynamics behind those? Let's go back to basics. We need sound policy in every single country. Now, we are saying the same thing to a UNFCCC actually when in the context of climate negotiation. No energy policy, no climate policy. Energy policy is a dock-in station for climate policy. If you have no energy policy, there's no way you can enforce an emissions policy because emissions policy has to filter through an existing energy policy. And that's for us. So for us, the first thing we need to get, let's get the basics right. About half of the world's countries do not have an energy policy. What do we mean by energy policy? Energy policy, we are saying, is a framework that is not going after one single objective. Let me give you an example where this can lead. Is South Africa. South Africa had one single objective, cheapest electricity for everybody. Let's do it all coal. It's the cheapest thing. That's what they have done very successfully. So successfully that it's very difficult to turn this around today. They are locked into a coal future. They're doing a great job to actually try and correct that today, I have to say. They're really working very hard. But they have locked themselves into coal to a very strong way. Think about China, think about many others who have pursued a single objective policy for a long time. We don't call that a policy. That's simply single objective. What we are saying is, if we want to, what is political risk? Political risk is actually the fact that things can change. And if things change, you need to be ready to cope with that change. With a single objective policy, you will not have that readiness. That's the reason why we are saying you need to pursue a policy framework, pursues at all times the following three objectives. Energy security is obviously the basic. Energy security to allow economic growth is the backbone pillar. But you need to have the environmental side and the social equity side. Think of affordability again. The environmental side, the CO2, but local pollution side, plus the social equity side, access plus affordability, must be pursued at all time in a trilemma. Yes, there is tensions between those issues, but yes, there are cross-cutting themes like energy efficiency that address all the three of them. We measure 129 countries with 23 indicators on those three dimensions, and here's the outcome. Congratulations, you're on place 8 with a double A. I'm coming back to that. You're on place 8 actually out of 129 countries. Those are the top 10. And we are, if you dive into New Zealand, you have a double AB rating, which means actually energy security rate A, energy equity A, environmental you're B. But let's look quickly at the trend. Energy security, you're doing quite well. Energy equity, and that's the affordability. The biggest downfall over the past years is on the affordability side, the energy equity side. I think that must be taken seriously. Again, keep the Miliband statement in the UK as your warning signal. If some populist person comes up and says, well, let's freeze tariffs, I don't think that the investor will shout, hooray, yes, let's freeze tariffs. What they do is the opposite. They walk away, and that creates the biggest problem to your future energy security that you can possibly imagine. So I think that the proposal here is probably to say this is an indication that the affordability issue must be taken seriously. But overall, you're doing extremely well. You have a well-oiled machine. This is correcting on the borders. It's about evolution. It's not about revolution. I think that's probably where I want to leave it. I don't know how much time I still have. Do I have a bit more time? Let me quickly come to some of the key takeaways from our Congress. The key Congress messages, we said, first of all, it was this uncertainty. We are living in a time of uncertainty. And I think what we said, there is 7 myths that we need to dismantle. I want to, rather than reading all of that, and you can find the slides, they are with John, and John can make them available. But let me try and make this as takeaway friendly as possible. 7 myths, there is 4 where there is more of it, and 3 where we do not have enough. We will have more demand. It's a myth to believe that demand will flatten out globally. Even though that may be the case for electricity demand in New Zealand, global demand driven by non-OECD growth, transportation growth, the middle class growth, etc., population growth, all those things are growing, and energy efficiency is not growing at the speed to compensate for all of that. So global energy demand, and we have seen it's roughly order of magnitude doubling by 2050. We say slightly less with our energy scenario, but kind of keep us order of magnitude doubling. Second, with the global demand, fossil fuels are still growing. We have seen in the best cases of scenarios, best for those who want to mitigate fossil fuels, CO2 emissions, etc. Best cases, it's stagnation of fossil fuels, and in the other cases, plus 60%. So overall, the second growth is we will have more fossil fuels, and there's no peak oil to stop that. Third, with that said, we have more CO2 emissions. It's not less, it's more. Fourth, yes, we have dramatic growth in renewables, but not enough to compensate for the demand growth. That's the 3 more. So demand is growing, fossil fuels along with those, CO2 emissions as a consequence, and the renewables cannot compensate for the demand growth. The 3 where we do not have enough. First, we do not have enough energy access progress, clearly. We do not have enough capital. Capital is shy. Capital is walking away from countries with high political risk. Think of the balance. Get the balance right. And last point, we do not have enough dialogue among policymakers, industry and finance to understand the nature and form of new risks. We see a number of new risks. Let me give you 4 categories of new risks. First, the extreme weather events. Second, the accelerating energy, water, food nexus. Third, cyber-related risks. And fourth, social activism risks. Those 4 categories of risks are relatively recent. They start affecting infrastructure. They pose clear new risk for the infrastructure. We do not have a shared understanding of the nature of those risks among finance, industry players, and policymakers, and we need to work very hard to create that understanding. I think those are some of the key takeaways, the key messages that we had at the Congress. I think among the business implications, and this is probably, this was not a formal, this is my personal collection of kind of business implications that I stole from sessions here, left, right, and center, and I again try to make those as takeaway friendly as possible. Business implications. First of all, it was, we have said it, coal, the plus minus 40% outlook. We are going from cheap coal to uncertain coal. That's, I think, a first business takeaway. Second, if you think of the gas, we came from a monopolistic gas to a more competitive gas context, thanks to shale gas, which puts the focus for business from upstream to technology. You're going to be strong as a player in the field if you know how to use micro-LNG, LNG overall, biogas, the gas to power, all this, the type, if you have a solid understanding of technology, it makes you a strong competitor. I'm not saying upstream is irrelevant, but technology becomes much more important. Third, big is kind of past. It's increasingly difficult to build big. And I think the key message is probably with increasing difficulty for a number of reasons. Remember that the capital, access to capital, land is becoming more scarce, population density is going up, the resistance against big project is going up, etc. Big is past. With that, actually the skill set shifts from running big plants to running big data. So from big is past in terms of power plants, which shifts the need for the skill set from big plants operations to knowing how to deal with big data. Next, we have a tendency obviously to have more activist consumers, the prosumers, which again shifts in the utility context the need from operational excellence to service brilliance. Yesterday somebody asked, how can you with decreasing, if you have energy efficiency, etc., and we have actually decreasing demand, how can you make money? It's that operational brilliance on the service side, that service brilliance, that actually will have to come up with new value propositions that has to compensate for some of the, for those places where you cannot grow the output. The only way to grow is if you increase the service side. And I think that's what this says. And I think those are some of the key points. The last one here, just again, I've mentioned the new risks. We better understand very well, and by the way, from WEC, we are almost there to launch a new effort to better understand resilience, what it means, resilient infrastructure. And to give one example, one of the thinkings that I think is discussed is hard versus soft resilience. Hard resilience is where we are coming from, building things stronger so that it doesn't come down. I think the world is shifting to a place where we are talking much more about soft resilience, where you accept it's going down, but the question is how can you speedily bring it up again? I think that's one of the concepts, but there's much more questions we need to ask on the resilience side, understanding the four risk categories, possibly others that I mentioned: extreme weather, energy, water, food nexus, the cyber and the social activism risk. We need to understand those better from the business side, know what it means for the financing of infrastructure, know what it means for infrastructure concepts themselves. I think those are some of the business implications. I leave it with that, but thank you very much for your patience and attention.